He was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, the third president of the United States, and the man responsible for the Louisiana Purchase. If Steve Harvey asked you to name an American president, Thomas Jefferson would probably be one of the first names out of your mouth. And indeed, he was as gifted a man as you'll find among the founding fathers. He was, of course, a philosopher, diplomat, and lawmaker, as were so many of the men who conceived of the American experiment in democracy. As much as any other man of his generation, he was responsible for promoting the civil liberties protected in the Bill of Rights, including the separation of church and state, the right to a trial by jury, and the freedoms of speech and press. But he was also an architect, agriculturalist, botanist, ethnologist, and even a paleontologist. Without him, we would never have had the famous Lewis and Clark expedition. He was also as complex a man as you'll find among the founding fathers, but more on that later. We've got 7 things you didn't know about Thomas Jefferson on this episode of Bigfoot's Great American History Show. One of Thomas Jefferson's first architectural designs was that of his home, Monticello, which, like most of his work, was heavily influenced by the Italian architect Andrea Palladio. Like Palladio, Jefferson found inspiration in classical architecture and its use of symmetry, proportion, and columns. For the idealistic Jefferson, the monumental architecture of Greco-Roman antiquity served as a means of protecting the truths of the Enlightenment against the corruption of time. He would turn to it again in his design of the Virginia State Capitol, which served as the capital of the Confederacy during the Civil War and remains in use by the Virginia General Assembly to this day. In later years, Jefferson would remodel Monticello, design the layout and rotunda of the University of Virginia, which he also founded, and play an important part promoting the neoclassical design now found across so much of Washington, D.C. He was also an avid botanist, ethnologist, paleontologist, and agriculturalist. As such, he began making plans to explore the American West at least 10 years before the eventual Lewis and Clark expedition. In fact, prior to Meriwether Lewis's departure on said expedition, Jefferson tutored the younger man in the use of the sextant and other instruments necessary for celestial navigation. Following Lewis and Clark's return, Jefferson planted newly discovered specimens of Missouri hominy, Pawnee corn, and various other seeds at Monticello. He also built what he called an Indian hall there to display native tools, art, and clothing, in an effort to promote understanding and appreciation of indigenous people. He was fascinated by fossils, and he collected and studied specimens of the mastodon and Megalonyx, notably aka Jefferson's ground sloth, as well as of shells and plants. His interest in paleontology colored his beliefs so much, in fact, that he actually believed Lewis and Clark would find live mammoths and Megalonyxes in the unexplored regions west of the Mississippi. As an agriculturalist, he experimented with crop rotation and soil conservation to enhance productivity on his plantation. A man with that many interests naturally had a killer library. During his lifetime, Jefferson acquired thousands of books in what amounted to the largest personal collection in the nation at the time. After the British burned the Library of Congress during the War of 1812, Jefferson offered over 6,000 of his own books as a replacement. And by offered, I mean sold for almost $24,000. This included volumes on a wide range of subjects representing his diverse interests, including philosophy, science, literature, history, and architecture. Alas, about 2/3 of these books were destroyed in a subsequent fire in 1851. Still, his collection formed the foundation of the Library of Congress's current collection, which at present holds the title of the largest library in the world. Jefferson was also a diplomat and served as the American minister to France during the period after the Revolutionary War and prior to the ratification of the Constitution. As a student of French Enlightenment philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Voltaire, he naturally developed a kinship with the French people. He later supported the French Revolution and its ideals of liberty and self-government, even after revolutionaries publicly executed King Louis XVI. Needless to say, his attachment to France softened in later years after a guy named Napoleon re-established the monarchy and tried to conquer Europe. Jefferson believed Native Americans to be in body and mind equal to the white man. Yet, as much as he may have admired Native Americans and their ways of life, he also expressed a desire to wean them from sacred hunting practices which required large amounts of land. He hoped instead to acclimate them to town and city life and indoctrinate them into practicing European agricultural techniques. As such, following his purchase of the Louisiana territory, he initially planned to reserve the lands west of the Mississippi River for Native Americans until such time as they could be integrated into white society. His idealism failed him here. As it happened, there was no preventing land-hungry Americans from settling almost immediately on the nation's new fertile lands. And alas, he didn't bother asking Native Americans what they thought of his bold future for them. Ultimately, many Native American tribes resisted assimilation efforts. Conflicts between Native Americans and white settlers persisted, resulting in violence and the gradual displacement of indigenous people from ancestral lands. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. Jefferson was a wealthy Southern plantation owner, and as such relied on enslaved labor for his livelihood. Yet he also publicly condemned the institution of slavery. He hoped, and it seems honestly believed, future generations of Virginians would abolish it in his home state of their own volition. What he did not count on was the enormous impact the cotton gin would have on the economy of the South, effectively binding cotton planters to a labor-heavy workforce. Jefferson's conscience, at least, was not clear. "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just," he wrote regarding slavery in his notes on the state of Virginia. As is often the case with humans whose conscience is not clear, he lived a life full of contradictions and hypocrisies. He supported eventual abolition, yet kept one of the largest slave populations in Virginia. He is said to have never physically punished his workers, yet he had no problem letting his overseers do it for him. He suspected that blacks were biologically inferior to whites, yet he kept a mistress who was 1/4 black. Sally Hemings was an enslaved woman and a half-sister to Jefferson's deceased wife, Martha. Beginning in her teens, Hemings bore 6 children of then unknown paternity. As far back as 1802, a scandal-mongering journalist named James Thompson Callender accused Jefferson of keeping a slave mistress named Black Sally. Today, the evidence in support of Callender's accusations is overwhelming. Jefferson's relationship to Hemings, however, remains the subject of much speculation. The relationship began, apparently, during Jefferson's tenure in Paris. In France, Hemings might have petitioned for her freedom. According to one of their children, Jefferson was forced to beg her to return to Monticello, which she agreed to do provided she received, quote, extraordinary privileges and a promise of eventual freedom for their children. Whether or not Jefferson held romantic feelings for Hemings or vice versa, he did not free her during his lifetime, and she thus was never officially more to him than, to use Callender's words, a slave concubine. Humans. How much criticism does Jefferson deserve? What was his greatest contribution to posterity? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. Until next time, this is Bigfoot saying so long and save me a seat at your next campfire.